Okay, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you very much for joining this session today. Your attendance, as always, is greatly appreciated. Obviously, the purpose, or the original purpose of this webinar was to talk about DDoS with F5 and Checkpoint, two of our key vendors. We're also going to talk a little bit about Heartbleed at the start, which I think you all saw the mail out about yesterday, and just explain a couple of things about that. So bear with us and we'll get started. Quick introduction for myself. I'll talk about Bytes SP. Then we're going to talk about Bytes SP and also about DDoS in general. We're then going to go on and F5 are going to do a presentation, and then Checkpoint are going to do a presentation. So we've got a few interesting bits to cover for you today. Hopefully you'll find it useful. All those of you who've signed up just for the Heartbleed bit at the beginning, because we did see a raft of registrations yesterday after we sent that, stick around for the second bit. You might just learn something. You might just find it interesting. So don't all disappear after the first bit, is what I'm saying. We'll be about 45 minutes plus the Q&A on the end. All of you are muted out, but you're welcome to ask any questions via the questions box. We will be doing Q&A at the end of the webinar, and all the guys who are presenting will be sticking around. This is a technical webinar rather today. If you want any commercials, please contact your account managers afterwards. We won't be dealing with commercials in the Q&A. And there'll be a survey at the end. If you can fill that in for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. So let's cover Heartbleed first. Let's just talk about that and then talk about what's going on with it. Heartbleed, what is it? It is a vulnerability in OpenSSL which enables you to extract data out of the memory of servers that are utilizing and running that software, in essence. If you believe the press, then this vulnerability has existed in OpenSSL for nearly 2 years, which is slightly scary. But hey, there's a lot of misinformation in the press at the moment. I've spoken to a couple of people who work inside the industry. They have known about this for around a week before the official press announcements went, which is why people have been able to patch seemingly very quickly after the initial announcements. But there's still a lot of misinformation out there. The biggest one we've seen is around passwords and changing passwords. Let's be clear on this. As end users, you should not be changing your passwords on any accounts until you have been told by your provider of that service that they have patched. Otherwise, you're changing your password to a new password that people will be able to get hold of. The thing with Heartbleed is we don't know just how much it's being used, particularly now that it's been made public. We just don't know how much traffic is passing backwards and forwards at the moment and how many passwords are being grabbed. So the thing is to be careful. How should providers be dealing with it? Well, I've only had what I would call one textbook example. And that's from a service I subscribe to called IFTTT. This is the email here that I had from them. And as you can see, this is actually textbook. This is what they should be doing. They should be notifying you when you have patched, signing you out of the service, and asking you to change your password at that point. They should be asking you to do nothing before that. So this is absolutely textbook on what should be being done. But as I said, I'm sure you guys can imagine, those of you who've known me for a while, I have many online accounts, be it Google, be it Facebook, be it Apple. Apple claim they haven't been compromised. Facebook have patched. Google have patched, so they say. Yahoo took a while to patch, but have patched. But I mean, most of us have got accounts on these services. None of them have sent emails like this, being absolutely clear on what you should do, which I think is very disappointing, particularly given the misinformation in the press. So if as an end user, there's no point you changing your password until you have been notified by your provider or you've checked if your provider has patched. We've got Checkpoint and F5 on the webinar today. Both Checkpoint and F5 from a solution provider point of view, those have got servers that have got vulnerable versions of OpenSSL on them. Checkpoint and F5 can both protect you, and they both protect you in similar but slightly different ways. So F5 statements on it is on the screen in front of you. We will be sending certainly my slide deck around, hopefully the Checkpoint F5 decks around if there's nothing confidential in them. F5 are basically saying that if you're providing or using SSL offload, because the TLS heartbeat traffic does not pass through, any virtual server protected by an SSL profile is not vulnerable, providing you have SSL offload turned on, or the SSL profile is being done. So that's all good. So if you've got your F5 boxes in place and you're doing SSL offload and putting the certificates on the F5 at the front end, then you are not vulnerable to Heartbleed, even if you have servers, or you are not exposing your data, even if you have servers that are vulnerable to it. The nice thing about that, from a point of view of all of those of you out there who have got F5 boxes, is you have never been giving away this data. This isn't something that suddenly changed. You have never been giving away that data. And I believe this is why certain companies are saying, yeah, we were vulnerable and we patched it, but we are confident we have not lost any data because they've had technologies in front of this, such as this, in front of their websites the whole time. From Checkpoint's point of view, there are two things we can do with Checkpoint. Checkpoint have issued an IPS protection, which blocks the specifically blocks the Heartbleed vulnerability. If you enable that, and then if you test a vulnerable server and then enable the IPS protection, you will see that the server goes from vulnerable to not vulnerable. On top of that, if you've got the headroom on your box, just for belt and braces, you can enable SSL decode on the Checkpoint box as well. Checkpoint does not run a vulnerable version of OpenSSL, so by you breaking the SSL connections on the Checkpoint box, you're protecting yourself in the same way you would on the F5 boxes. So that's something that we can help you guys with from a technical point of view. So that's kind of the detail, certainly from a Checkpoint and F5 point of view. We are still correlating together our vendors and what's happening with them and what isn't happening with them. Some of them being very cagey. Cisco have announced a range of 13 products that are vulnerable, mainly VoIP-based products that are vulnerable to this problem. But I guess, by and large, you probably need to be on private networks to get that. They've got 60 further products that are under analysis that they've not issued the status of yet. RSA are being quite cagey about it as well. They've issued lots of information on how to use their tools to find whether other people are vulnerable, but they haven't told us yet whether their stuff is vulnerable yet. Checkpoint and F5 have been straight on the bat and have told us straight away what is vulnerable and what isn't. So hats off to them. But that's pretty much where we are with it. And if you've got any questions, then please do give us a shout. DDoS is what this webinar is actually about and what we're here to talk about. It's just, as we had it, we thought we'd cover Heartbleed at the start. DDoS is... it's interesting these days. DDoS used to be, going back 5-6 years, just brute force. And I think a lot of people still perceive it as that. The number of companies and the number of very senior people in companies who come to us and say, there is no point me deploying any product or any tools on site because everything's done in the cloud, right? Everything happens in the cloud. There is just no point us doing it. And actually, that is categorically not the case. DDoS can be, it isn't just about brute forcing out links and sending too many packets down the links anymore. It can be about all manner of different things. And a lot of those things can be stopped with on-site appliances. And actually, most of the key attack vectors that are out there now can be stopped with on-site appliances. I mean, you can see some of the stats that we've got here: 2,000 attacks daily, a third of all downtime incidents attributed to DDoS, which is absolutely crazy. It's really, that's a huge number. The NTP attacks and the NTP reflect attacks that occurred about a month ago when they first came out, 400 gig of data from just 3,000 servers. Compare that with the spam house attacks that happened about 2 months before that. There's only 389 gig of data from 40,000 servers. So you can see how these things are ramping up and escalating all the time. And a lot of that, let's be honest, Windows XP went end of life this week. There are no more security patches for it. There's an awful lot of machines out there that are not patched anymore that can hose bots and can be used to do this kind of attack for you, and you can just buy access to them. So DDoS is changing all the time. Useful little website this, that actually, I'll give credit to Shona. Shona found and brought to my attention. This is a little live website. If you put digital attack map into Google, you'll find it. That basically shows you what DDoS attacks are happening on any day. And you can see at the moment, at the time this slide was taken, there was 2 attacks going into South Africa from 2 different sources. I checked it this morning, there was only 1. If we have a quick look at it now, let's see what it actually shows right now. It shows that. So you guys can see that and get an idea of that. You can see how it evolves and how it changes day to day. But yeah, there are ways of finding out what's going on, and it's quite interesting what happens with it. As we said, it's not just about websites. We've been working with a customer this week who have got VoIP systems running over the internet. All of their calls are handled by an external provider who have got all the PSTN lines. They then hop that off over the internet back to them. Well, if you were to denial of service that, they'd lose all their phone systems. Email and CRM systems are all web-based. It could be that. Bill payment, if you take down bill payment lines, a lot of them are internet connectivity based these days. There are so many ways of hurting businesses. And this whole thing that so many people think that DDoS is just firing packets from different locations down an internet link and you just take it down with volume of traffic just is such an old idea and such an old way of looking at it. There are many, many different mechanisms and many different ways of doing it. And the guys are going to talk about that a little bit and talk about obviously how they can deal with it. The biggest problem with it is there's so many different ways of doing a DDoS attack now that actually, how do you work out what the real traffic is and what the real traffic isn't? How do you stop suspected behavior and allow genuine behavior? To a degree, Heartbleed gives us this in a nutshell. You've got a line in there that says avoiding the smokescreen of data theft. Well, if you've got all this stuff going on, all this DDoS stuff, and a lot of times you've got attacks going on, but your business is still functioning, how do you tell if data is being harvested? How do you tell if stuff is being done? And how do you respond going forward? So many challenges with it. It's really, really difficult. We've used the word prevention pillars, but there's so many things in here that are just common sense. Knowing your network is really important. Knowing what's normal. Even today, just going back to the basics of doing checkpoint installs or F5 installs, when we try and write acceptance plans for customers, just the concept of, well, what does your network normally do? People can't answer it. We replace a firewall and they start doing testing on stuff they haven't tested in 6 years that they think should work, and they don't know whether it worked before, which is why we always do tests before and after install. But the number of times we get given a test that we do it before the install and it didn't work. Is absolutely crazy. So knowing your network, knowing who you need to call for the different support mechanisms, your ISP. How many of you could hand on heart say, I know the phone number for my ISP, I know my contract number, I know exactly who to call if something happens with my internet link? Some of you certainly will, but I know all of you won't. Some of you won't. Knowing what to do, how to do it, knowing what to block and where to block. And that's where those last ones really are where the tools that people like Checkpoint and F5 are starting to provide now, and they're going to talk about next, really start to come into it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kieran. Kieran should now be available to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make him a panelist, or Shona, are you? Shona is making Kieran a panelist. So without further ado, I will shut up. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Kieran, you need to unmute yourself, just so you know we can't hear you at the moment. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Hi, Kieran. Yes, we can hear you now.
All gone a bit quiet.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Kieran.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for that, David. Apologies there, just a bit confusing trying to unmute myself. So hopefully everybody can see my screen there. I'm just going to go back and get rid of some of my screen. Fantastic. So, David, thank you for letting me speak today. So we've only got a short time here, 20, 25 minutes. So we're just really going to dip our toe in the water and go over the F5 approach and best practice and solutions around the multi-layered DDoS attacks. So I guess the first thing is to really look at where we are today with the threat landscape. So let me just click through. There we go. Fantastic. So the first thing we're really seeing, especially among F5 and the way we're fronting applications today, is the access of users are increasingly becoming more and more mobile. This really changes the landscape of where our users are coming from, and also the threat vectors that are pointed at the applications. The other thing is that applications, when we talk about them today, they really are web applications. Everything we tend to do, our business, tends to be performed through the web. If it's not webified, people tend to not bother with it. Services that used to be installed on servers in organizations are now becoming cloud services, and are becoming software as a service. We ourselves within F5, we use tools like Salesforce, which are web-based cloud tools. We use Concur, web-based expenses systems. So in terms of the vector of the attacks, they're very, very much focus towards HTTP. In fact, many times I've heard, HTTP is the new TCP. Your infrastructure and your security really has to understand HTTP and the granularities of HTTP so that we can protect our applications against it. So security really is going beyond the server. In fact, going beyond the server, going beyond the network. The reasoning behind that we buy all of these shiny new devices is, they look quite good, but the reason is because they run applications at the end of the day. We buy iOS devices, Android devices, because they run good applications. Beyond that, they're just a doorstop that we could use. So because of the language we're talking today and the way our applications are going, we really need to talk and be able to protect ourselves against the language of the web. So David mentioned the good old network attacks. They're still there. They're not going away. If someone is going to try and fill your pipe, they've got plenty of ways to do it today. We've seen a lot of the amplification and reflection attacks coming into their force over the last year or two, primarily by DNS amplification reflection, and then more recently other connectionless protocols like NTP. It wouldn't surprise me if you start seeing other stuff like SNMP and things like that. There's a whole variety of UDP connectionless protocols that will offer the sender a larger response than his initial request. So really to protect against this, there's still network attacks, but you need to be able to hold the wolves at the front door. So by that I mean, so for instance, I was talking to one of my customers the other day. They're a gaming customer. They write online games. They said, yeah, do you know what? We get hit 2 or 3 times a week, quite regular. It's about 5 or 6 gig for them. It's it's not headline breaking stuff, but it's stuff that doesn't warrant them putting their traffic through a cloud scrubbing service. The costs and the time and the delay to get that type of mitigation is just not worth it for them. So they need an application intelligence solution, because each one of these, although they're network attacks, they need to be mitigated in slightly different ways. Some need to be able to change SYN flags. Some need to be able to look at UDP packets and work out if requests were sent and should we drop the responses. So having the application understanding so that they can drop these type of attacks is important for them. DNS, well, we've seen obviously the amplification attacks that we just talked about, but DNS itself as a protocol is key. Mustn't forget about things like DNS spoofing attacks, where we man in the middle, where we can see messages diverted to other web servers. Massive case, I think it was only a few weeks ago, the Google public DNS servers 8.8.8.8, they were intercepted by some BGP requests, and people who were utilizing those open resolvers were actually being sent to some sites in South America. So again, understanding and having solutions that can look inside those protocols and protect those types of traffic is important. And then SSL. So, if I talked about SSL to customers a few years ago, it was, yes, okay, we understand we can do SSL offload on your box. From a security aspect, again, we understand if we want to stop the bad guys, we need to be able to look inside that encrypted traffic, be able to decrypt it so we can work out what's in there and maybe block it or stop it. But as David just mentioned, SSL itself is vulnerable today. Varying attacks we've seen around SSL and problems. We've seen, the SSL renegotiation vulnerability a few years ago. If your servers were vulnerable to that, you were being hammered. You could be hammered by a guy, on a village broadband connection with one PC can bring back down a server with a renegotiation attack. You've had the problem with the random user nonces that were supposedly not random anymore. The problem we've seen with the NSA, and then last but not least, quite recently, this Heartbleed attack. And I've got a couple of slides on the Heartbleed that I'll go into as well. And then, as I mentioned before, it's all about the application. That's the reason we buy these devices. So you have to understand the application layer. And for us at F5, that's very much focused around the HTTP traffic, the HTTPS. So as you can see, there's a huge array of DOS and DOS mitigation that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at different types of attacks. And if we analyze that against the good old 7-layer stack, we can see that this really stretches through right down from layer 1, 2, all the way up to layer 7. The OWASP top 10. The stuff that it makes headline news outside of these big amplification attacks that fill the pipe. Really is customer data being leaked by SQL injection, cross-site scripting, very much application-focused attacks these days. So the nice thing with F5 is we've always been a full proxy. We've always been that layer of abstraction between the clients and the application. And we're very much focused around that language of the web, the HTTPs, the DNSs. We understand these, what would I would say, a narrow range of protocols, but very, very deep in their understanding. We have knobs, bells, and whistles for every element of HTTP that you can imagine that allows us to protect and mitigate and change information along that path. So having a solution that is full proxy, handles the client, handles a full TCP connection, and then allows you to look inside the full 7 layers of that stack, and then create a new TCP connection to the backend services, your applications in this case, and make a new full layer 7 inspection, really gives you full visibility and control of the traffic. So something we've come up with in F5 is something called reference architectures. We've had a lot of customers coming to us with different problems and saying, well, how do I go about looking at the solution for, I don't know, multi-tenant access, cloud gateway access, SAML providers, denial of service. So if I give you an example here, this is the F5's denial of service reference architecture. So what we're trying to do here is highlight to customers, give them some tools, give them some resources and some best practice on how we feel customers would help best protect their environment from denial of service attacks. And this ranges throughout the stack as we talked about. So you can see here, multi-strategy ISPs, cloud scrubbing service. We're not advocating that if you've got a cloud scrubbing service and you absolutely require it, that you get rid of it. Our advice to customers is always, if you can afford both, absolutely go with it. But if you're, cost restricted, and like most SMEs are, then at least have a good on-premise solution that can give you the flexibility control. Threat feed intelligence is something we offer with F5. So that's our IP reputation services, where we can look for IP addresses that come in. We can work out, are they from a known botnet? Are they coming from a known anonymous proxy? Again, giving you control at the outer layer. And this outer layer, this tier 1, this is really our first approach, where we're looking at the very broad brushstroke approach. This is where we'll start looking for your network attacks, the stuff typically that in the past your traditional network firewall would do. So looking at flood attacks, being able to enable sync cookies so that you're not falling over. One of the first things that falls over in these session types of attacks is your firewalls, because they're stateful devices that have to monitor the states. Just having the sheer horsepower of an ADC that was over-engineered to start with to have to monitor both client-side and server-side connections is going to give you a head start in that effect. But as I say, we're not advocating that you get rid of any of your firewall services. We're looking at a best practice. One of the things you'll see on the screen here, we're not mentioning any products or services. We're just offering a solution here. The tier 2 layer here, this is where we feel our customers really should be then, once we've kind of sorted the wheat from the chaff, really looking at the CPU intensive defense mechanisms. So this is where we'd be looking at the SSL, terminating, maybe doing some decryption, looking at web application firewall layers, looking at those OWASP top 10 attacks, and even some of the low and slow attacks. So, HTTP get floods, stuff that would quite easily come through any, even our own layer 3 firewall, because it just looks like a legitimate request. So how do you have the intelligence to look at a request that might be trying to hammer your back-end servers, but it very much looks like a legitimate request? So I'll, there's a slide on that I'll go into in a second. So here's a couple of examples. As I say, I know we've only got 25 minutes, so I can't go through all 7 layers and different ways we can help mitigate. But just to give you an example on some of the application layers. So you heard me mention there about the what we call an HTTP get flood or request flood. So this is generally termed as what we call a heavy URL. So heavy URL could be a URL within your application that you're hosting that particularly takes a lot of CPU clock cycles or a lot of resources on the back end to produce a response. So let me give you an example. Let's say your application is, let's say you're an online grocer or you're an online retail, and you have the ability on your application for somebody to go and search for a number of stores. Now, your stores, you might only want to give customers within a 200-mile radius. So, but what if your application allows you to place in a 20,000-mile radius? Your application then has to go through the database and pretty much pull every single store in your inventory globally back to the client. So this is considered a heavy URL. It's not going to be something that your clients would legitimately want to do. They probably want to look at a postcode and look at stores within a 10-mile radius, but it's something they could do. So something F5 does is it monitors the URLs requests that are coming through the application delivery controller, the F5 device, and it starts dropping the responses, the server responses, into different buckets of latency. You can set a threshold to this. So what we can say is, right, here's my threshold of server response time, and any requests that suddenly start taking longer to respond in terms of server latency, I'm going to start dropping those in buckets, and I'm going to consider those heavy URLs, and I want to start protecting them. So clients who start requesting those URLs heavily, I'm going to initiate some type of mitigation. Now, those mitigations could be varying. They could be, actually, we'll inject some JavaScript into response and we'll work out, is it a real client? We'll look for mouse clicks and keyboard typing, timing and things like that. Or it could just be, we'll actually start rate limiting that particular client to that particular URL. But again, it's having the full layer 7 intelligence to be able to stop these type of denial of services. And that goes on to, another type of service that's quite widely available is the anti-bot scanner protection. So this was a service that was utilized quite a lot in the past through people who didn't want their information shown on price comparison sites. So let's say you were an airline, I don't want my prices scanned, scraped and put on the price comparison site. So they would go and throw an F5 in front and they would go and implement this anti-bot scanner protection. But this is turning out to be a very useful tool recently in the attack that I previously just talked about, because what attackers tend to do, and I specifically work in the finance industry, and a lot of denial of service attacks were aimed at the finance industry in the last 12, 24 months at quite a large running spate. And one of the things we saw is the attackers would go and scan their websites first, and they would try and work out what they thought these heavy URLs were by virtue of the response time of the URLs coming back to them. Very simple to do. You can do this with a curl or wget script. So by having something as simple as anti-bot and scanner protection on their F5s allowed them to instantly block just the scanning before they even got the intelligence of the information of what URLs were heavy enough. So again, another layered approach. It's all about layers. We have a 7-layered stack. We need to be able to look in all layers then. So David mentioned the Heartbleed. So it'd be rude of me not to mention the Heartbleed and what we're doing about it. So the nice thing is, as David mentioned there, if you're already proxying your SSL traffic with an F5 device, then fantastic. As long as you're using the compatible ciphers, we're not vulnerable at all. That OpenSSL stack that is vulnerable is not part of our default cipher suite. But to give you an example, so I launched the Heartbleed attack against one of my boxes in the lab just to see what I could come up with. I went and set up a fake user. I'm not sure if you can see, I've highlighted in red, called Heartbleed_user. It took me 2 or 3 attempts of pulling back the 64K responses of memory to get some information, but you can quite easily see there, it didn't take me a lot, and I've obviously truncated the response here, for me to pull back the information of that user. This was user information that was stored in memory on one of my Linux servers in OpenSSL. So, these servers really are vulnerable and you really can get the information. So the question came to us, okay, well, if you're proxying, then that's great, but what about the customers that aren't proxying the SSL? What about the customers that are just doing simple load balancing and passing SSL through. They're not uncommon, especially within the finance industry. They have a lot of rules and regulation that say you can't offload SSL in certain places. So, straight away, again, having the flexibility of something like an application delivery controller and understanding up to layer 7 in the stack and being able to manipulate that allows you to go and make some changes. So in our case, that was quite a simple iRule. So an iRule is just a simple tickle script that we can apply to our box, and you can apply that to one of your applications. So in this case, because we understand SSL, we don't have to look inside the encrypted traffic, but we can look at the SSL handshake. We can work out, is that particular client advertising support for heartbeats? And if they are advertising support, are they sending a heartbeat request? And then we'll block them. May sound a bit harsh, but what we found, in the last couple of days is there aren't any legitimate browser clients that are requesting heartbeats at this moment in time. It's just, it tends to be OpenSSL clients or curl clients and things like that. So not really affecting, probably 99% of our users. So nice, quick, easy stop for those who aren't proxying our connections. So look, I'm just going to push through these because I do know we are short on time. So some of the things we're offering here is some best practices and resources around denial of service attacks. So all of what I'm going to skip through here on the next couple of slides are documented in some freely available documentation that you can get through the chaps at SP here, and we can obviously provide through our websites here. But some of the things we're really looking at, and again, David mentioned this, is really having just some written out steps. Call it an action plan, call it standard operating procedures, call it a playbook, whatever you will, but have something in place that says, right, if we are getting hit with an attack or what we think is an attack, let's follow something. And the first thing out of all is just verify the attack. Am I really being attacked? Is it me, or is the internet down? Silly question, but verifying that access to your application from varying different places is getting the same result. And then going through a process of contacting the right people, triaging applications. I'm not going to go through every point. You can read the slides on the list there. But as I say, this is something that we're providing for you as a real-time approach, and something we've documented, allowing you to consume at your leisure there. So if you haven't got anything in place, at least you might want to use this as a framework there. And again, with your response plan, again, something really, if you haven't got in place already, then at least when an attack's happening, something you should be logging. Who are your contact list people? Who should you be contacting? Again, we mentioned there about knowing the right people at your ISPs or your service providers or your cloud providers. Who should you whitelist to your partners? Which really are your key critical important applications, and how do we triage them? And again, this is all a framework we've put together here. So as I mentioned there, there's a few key resources so the reference architecture you saw there with the multi-layered approach, there's actually there's a single layered approach, multi-layered, triple layered approach. We've all documented that in our reference architecture documentation. It's not War and Peace, it's a 20-page documentation, allows you as customers to sit down, look at best practice, without hammering you with products, and look at, what type of technology should we putting in areas. If you decide that first tier is not an F5 firewall and a checkpoint firewall, fantastic. Utilize the skills of, all of the security vendors, in unison, so we can complement each other in, the approach we're providing for security. We've obviously got the bottom right-hand corner here. You can see the DDoS protection recommended practice guide. So this is a bit more of a get your teeth into documentation. What should I be configuring? Where should I be placing? What sort of attack should I be seeing? But as I say, it's a framework there for our customers to get their teeth into and help them out. And all this really wraps up into something F5 are calling an application delivery firewall. And as you can see here, we're not trying to talk products here. We're trying to talk solutions about application security, access control, DDoS. Allow customers to take pieces of these which they feel fit that they should place on our application delivery controllers, and then giving them the tools and utilization to help mitigate against those attacks. So hopefully that was useful for you. As I say, very high level approach. I know we only had 20-25 minutes. But any questions, I'm going to stay on the line, so feel free to pop them over, and I'll answer all I can.
Kieran, hi, it's Shauna.
Hi, Shauna.
Hello. We have a question from one of the gentlemen on the line asking, can a standard ASA without IPS block DDoS?
A Cisco ASA, are we talking about here, I'm presuming?
Yes, I think one would assume.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it goes back to those layers of DDoS. You know, a standard ASA firewall is going to give you some very typical layer, you know, layer 2, 3, 4 protection. So SYN protection, SYN flood protection, things like land attacks, good old Smurf attacks, cookie protection. So it will offer you a layer of protection up to a point. But what happens when we go past those layers? You know, as I mentioned before, the easiest one to convey is what happens when a legitimate HTTP request looks like a legitimate HTTP request, but actually what it's really doing is hammering one URL because it knows that URL takes an inordinate amount of time to process the request. Is that still a DOS attack? You know, something your outer skin ASA, even with an IPS system, is not really, you know, a signature is not going to pick up that attack. It's going to need some more intelligence and some more high-level processing for that. So I guess the answer is yes, up to a level, but not the full range of attacks.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. We're now going to hand over to Tom Kendrick and Jim Ockfist from Checkpoint, who are going to be sharing some best practices and approach to preventing and mitigating DDoS. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Shona. Morning, guys. It's Tom from Checkpoint here. I hope you're all well. Kieran, thank you for your presentation as well this morning. So for those that don't know me, I am Tom Kendrick, a security engineer at Checkpoint, and I will be doing the first sort of 5-10 minutes of this presentation, and then I'll hand over to Jim Ockfist, as mentioned, who's one of our sort of European experts in the DDoS field. So without further ado, this is the agenda that we have for today. So just a little look at trends. What are our options today? So what can Checkpoint do for you now? We'll also look into solutions to kind of take away these DDoS attacks and help you guys out, make sure the business is available and up and running. And then we'll have a little summary at the end. So firstly, kind of what are some of the ways that DDoS attacks, be it a DOS attack or a DDoS attack, what are the ways that they can impact your network? And as Kieran's kind of mentioned earlier on, there are a variety. Okay, so we do have the more simple network-based flood-type attacks, and we'll see a couple of examples of those in just a couple of moments. Now, the focus of those is often to try and take away bandwidth, take away resource, and impact service through volume. At the same time, we also have application attacks, where we're trying to target a particular application, so maybe my web server or my financial systems, whatever it may be that I'm trying to present sort of maybe to the outside world, and try to overpower or overrun a particular set of resources available to that particular system. And again, kind of apt as we've just all been discussing with the Heartbleed discussions as well, but also there are other ways that attackers will try and take advantage of exploits within your applications, for example, that you may use. And again, we need to ensure that whatever solution that we have on offer is going to cover all of these different types of avenue. Now, again, by all means, take a look at some of the resources. We'll try and share the presentation at the end. But again, from this Hackmageddon site here, we can see that back in 2013, it's not always the warfare, the espionage. It's not always these government organisations that are definitely making it into the news, definitely the kind of things that we hear about. But it's often the hacktivism, the cybercrime, the guys that are just out there for kind of good times, bad times, depending on your point of view. And it's often those guys that make up the vast majority of the attacks that we see at Checkpoint. Now, again, we'll just touch on the 2013 trends and again, just see how things have changed. But one thing I think to take note of here is how, again, it's a variety of techniques. Now, we can see from the top left that in 28% of the cases, DDoS is often the most common method used by attackers to try and attack your resource. Because for many of them, the tools are very, very much freely available, quite easy for them to take advantage of, and it doesn't take a massive amount of skill. We also see, again, from the research that we've done with some of the partner organisations that we work with, it's often government, financial, and retail who still appear to be the greatest targets of these kinds of attacks. Okay, and finally, in many of the attacks that we have seen and have been part of, as Kieran mentioned earlier, there's a number of layers in this OSI model, and what we need to keep in mind is that an attacker maybe many years ago might try and use one simple single method of attack, but more and more these days what they're trying to do is use a combination of attacks such that you can be investigating an area in area 1, but actually there's another attack going on area 2, area 3, or they may be using different types of attack or different methods of attack to try and compromise your system. So you overcome one of those types of attack, but not really taking into account that something else is also going on behind the scenes. Now, as we've seen, the stuff that makes the news is the big stuff. The big stuff, that's what sells papers, that's what sells, that's what keeps us coming back to the different websites. Now, in reality, some of the things that we've observed is most attacks are not that big. Most of the attacks, over 80% of the attacks, are generally using a variety of bandwidth. And in the vast majority of these cases, it's more often the lower bandwidth attacks, the kind of the small guys, the people who've got those connections, who can try and utilize those connections. More often than not, it's those guys that are doing the attacks. And as a result of that, it's not always a service outage. Yes, in around a third of the cases, don't get me wrong, there will be an outage, there will be some sort of system down, there will be something that reflects upon you in a negative way. But as IT professionals, as security professionals, we always try and build in enough redundancy and enough resilience to try and keep things operational behind the scenes. So very, very frequently, it can be just a service level degradation, and that's where it becomes very, very difficult to pinpoint the attacks. And moving on from there, again, many of the attacks can be short-lived. And if attack is only for a few minutes, a system that you maybe offload to, like a scrubbing center or something that uses BGP, which may take 30, 40 minutes to move connections to and from, they're not going to help. They're not going to help in every single situation, because in many cases the attack has been and gone so much faster than they're able to react. So again, we were taking a little look at some research online. Strange Loop Networks, they did a case study of what's the impact on just a 1-second delay in my web page loading. And here's some of the things that we saw. Okay, so conversion rate, so the idea of an initial sort of bit of interest turning into a sale, 3.5% reduction. Reduction in things that people place into their shopping cart. But actually what I saw more worrying was a sort of 10% reduction in page views and bounce rate. So if I'm trying to sell on the internet, if the internet is what I use to do my business, if I'm now in a situation where 10% of the people, if the people visiting my site, 10% of them don't look at as many sites as they would do, or maybe 10% of them just don't even bother waiting for the page to load, then that can have a real impact on me as an organization. Now, coming into 2014, and again, I've actually been on site with some customers who have been worryingly participating, especially in universities, in some of these amplification attacks, as we mentioned earlier on. I've actually seen customers who, because they had no DDoS solution, they had no DDoS strategy, as we're going to discuss in a moment, they really struggled to react against any sort of DDoS attack. And what we've seen in the early part of 2014 is what we see as amplification attacks, where tools like DNS, like NTP, because of their connectionless nature, they're able to spoof the source address of the packet, and they can request responses that are far, far greater than the original message that they sent. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, do we have a strategy? And at Checkpoint, we were having a conversation, Jim and I were having a conversation earlier in the week about maybe what things we can help you guys with, and maybe what sort of steps you guys should be taking. So I think what's key is obviously to have an understanding of your assets. So what is it you're protecting? What is in scope, what's out of scope? Okay, you need to have a clear understanding of what those assets are. We also have to have a baseline of the network, because again, if we don't know what is normal, it makes it very, very difficult to identify what is an attack, what's just generally increased usage, what are the trends over a week, over a month, or longer. We would always suggest you have a kind of break glass emergency response team or ERT group, and everyone in that team so you need to be aware of what your role is when an attack takes place. And we would always advise within that setup there should be someone who is a manager. The idea is we don't want people to lose their heads. We want someone there to kind of take a step back, to coordinate, to understand, and manage the event through from start to finish. Now, if we were to implement a DDoS solution, one thing that we would always advise is to make sure that it is tested, and so should your responses be. So every month, every quarter, in all the businesses that we're in, we have fire drills, we have fire safety tests. Shouldn't we also be practicing and testing these tools, these DDoS tools, their effectiveness and the effectiveness of the team to work together? So those are the kind of things that we would advise. Now, don't forget, when you look at DDoS solutions from many of the vendors, you do have access to specialists as part of your contracts, okay? So what I would like to just say is you're not alone. So if you are a DDoS protected customer, if you are under DDoS attack, call the guys at Bytes, call the guys at Checkpoint. We're all here to try and help you out and to try and keep the business operational. Now, very, very quickly, just to touch on what Software Blades can do even today. So Software Blades within the firewall, we have such features as aggressive aging, which lets us try and time out or close down connections where we see they're being used far too much or running short on connection tables. We have network quota, so we can limit the number of connection sources. We can adjust our rule bases, and we can use some of the features in the rule base to try and block certain types of traffic towards the network, which would also help us out. We can adjust stateful inspection timers, which can also help us protect against different types of attack. And then, for example, within the IPS blade itself, we've got geoprotections to block attackers or hosts by country. We've got worm catchers, so again, we can look for structures or patterns within certain types of traffic. We can adjust and alter the TCP window size enforcement if you require it. We have obviously SYN flood protection and HTTP flood protection. Both are quite generic in their nature, so as you'll see when we discuss in a moment with Jim, this is some of the basic things that we could do in many of the older versions of the product that have been around forever. Now, as of R76 and higher, there are a few things that we added in. So one of those being Penalty Box. Penalty Box is a feature that we added in for customers who use IPS or firewall, and it allows you to put possibly bad hosts into what we call the penalty box, so we drop their traffic for a set period of time. Okay, so that's one quick way where you might be able to move one of those attackers away very, very quickly. In addition, there's a feature called Optimized Drops, and Optimized Drops is, in effect, for those of you who know Secure Excel, think of Optimized Drops as like Secure Excel for dropped traffic. So we can template the dropped connections and again get rid of that traffic from the gateway without any additional systems. And then finally, brought into that particular version was another feature called FWSAMP, So again, this is a command line tool that's for rate limiting. So for example, if you are under attack or you believe you identified some hosts that you're unsure about, you can use that tool as well to maybe rate limit certain traffic from those hosts. Okay. Now, obviously, as we've discussed, as Kieran's discussed earlier, and as we addressed in the question about the Cisco device briefly a few moments ago, yes, all of us can help with security gateways. Yes, there are a variety of different types of DDoS attacks that may take place. Now, gateways can offer you a certain amount of protection, but there will come a stage where you do need something that is more tuned and more dedicated to achieve the task that you need to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to pass over to Jim, and Jim will go through some of the additional products that we have available to you.
Thank you, Tom. Oops, I probably shared the wrong screen, right? Let's see if I can share the correct screen for you. That was kind of a mistake. So I hope you can hear me, everyone. I'm trying to share my monitor right now. So I hope you're able to see my monitor correctly. Thank you.
Just so you know, Jim, we can see and
thank
hear
you for
you
that, Tom.
absolutely fine. Okay.
Thank you. So as Tom mentioned, all those kinds of different protections that we have within the checkpoint security gateways are very useful to use, for example, when you are targeted with a denial of service attack and you don't have anything else in place in order to mitigate those kinds of threats. But the downside with those simple kinds of protection methods is that they usually generate a lot of false positives, and also during the time of the attack they will drop traffic from legitimate users as well as attack users in order to keep the infrastructure up and running. So the problem with those, the solutions are called kind of basic rate-based protections, are that you need to tune them on a constant level to make sure that you have correct threshold values, so those protections will only trigger once you indeed have real attack traffic. And also, as I said, when they're enabled, they're going to start rate limiting the traffic down to a certain level to make sure that the infrastructure is capable of handling the traffic and the requests that are being sent towards it. And also, as mentioned earlier by Tom, attackers is taking advantage of traditional security solutions. So we have those more sophisticated kind of attacks like application-based flooding, while the attackers are sending, for example, HTTP GET requests towards the web server in a high amount, which will then take a lot of resources off the web server itself. So from a traditional security point of view, those kinds of GET requests looks like completely normal legitimate HTTP requests. So the firewall will just allow it, the IPS will also allow it, and application control will not see it as malicious in any way. But the problem is that it's actually indeed the behavior of this traffic. The behavior is the malicious part, the flood of requests being sent towards the web server. So in order to have a system, if you're targeted on a regular basis, in order to have a system that is blocking the attackers but not the legitimate traffic, we for 2 years ago offered a solution called DDoS Protector. This is a dedicated appliance with a purpose-built hardware capable of handling denial of service attacks. And the difference with this solution and those rate-based solutions is going to be covered a little bit later in this presentation. But this appliance here is available in 6 different models. So we can handle from 500 megabit of legitimate traffic up to 12 gigabit of legitimate traffic. So this is what we can transfer through the unit, and at the same time handle up to, for the high-end units, 10 million packets per second in attack traffic. So when looking at those solutions, you're looking at the sizing of the amount of legitimate traffic that you need to be capable of handling. Now the difference with this dedicated solution in comparison to the more simple protection methods that we have in our, for example, firewall solution is that for network flood, for example, we have multiple layers of protections for those different types of attack vectors. We have those network floods, we have those kinds of application-based flooding, and we have those kinds of direct application denial service attacks and low and slow attacks. So then we need to have multiple layers of protections in order to handle those different types of attack vectors. But we also need to be able to handle them in a correct manner. So we need to be able to differentiate between attack traffic and legitimate traffic. But at the same time, we also need to have a solution that can understand the network behavior by itself. You don't need to spend hours and hours per week in order to manually tune the solution. So with this solution, we have a behavioral analysis engine. It's the core infrastructure of the product. And with the behavioral analysis engine, the solution can by itself learn the behavior of the network traffic that's being sent down to your data center. And on an ongoing basis, automatically tune itself to have its correct baselines. So if you're adding services to the data center or removing the services, the solution will be capable of understanding this and adjusting itself. Okay? And with using all these behavioral analysis parameters, it's going to be able to understand and differentiate between increase of legitimate traffic or attack traffic. And then, in addition to this, when the solution detects an attack, we don't want to use a rate limiting protection. We would like to be able to block the attack traffic, but only the attack traffic, and allow the legitimate traffic. And we do this by detecting the attack characteristics in the flood when we're detecting a flood. And then the solution will by itself generate a real-time signature that will filter out the attack traffic and nothing else but that. And then for the other types of layers of attacks that we have, for example, server floods, we're capable of doing advanced challenge mechanisms in order to differentiate between legitimate users and attackers. And we can detect if someone is issuing SIM floods to us or idle connection floods, etc. to validate if the connection being established is going to send data packets as a normal user or not. And on the application layer, we're also using a behavioral engine. So we understand the behavior on the application layer. We learn the behavior towards your web servers in the organization, and automatically, on an ongoing basis, tunes the system to have the correct baseline. So we can differentiate between, for example, a flash crowd of users that would like to connect to your site because you're announcing something interesting, and attack traffic, where someone is flooding you with requests. And then the last layer of defense that we have is a signature-based engine that contains predefined signatures that you can update, but also you can write custom signatures on the fly. So if there's a new type of really advanced attack technique, for example, a very new type of low and slow attacks that never been seen in the wild before, it's possible to manually write a custom signature within the solution in order to mitigate this. And also, as Tom mentioned, included in the support contract, a customer will have access to a dedicated team called the emergency response team. And they can also assist the customer in situations where the solution is not capable of automatically blocking the attack. Because this is the idea with this solution, that it should detect the attack traffic very quickly and automatically start mitigating it without the need of hands-on from the security engineers. So the security engineers would only monitor the situation over a smart event, for example, to view the incidents. So with this solution, by deploying this in a topology,
we are ready to protect the environment within minutes. We can actually deploy this solution at a customer that is currently under attack under an emergency situation. The solution will automatically detect the attack heuristics, the application floods, etc., and start creating real-time signatures in order to filter out the attack traffic. And also, the customers that utilize these solutions, they don't need to change their existing network topology, because this device is completely transparent. It works similar to a layer 2 bridge, and it will also work in a symmetrical as well as a asymmetrical network environment. So larger enterprises usually have multi-home internet connections, so we can protect those kinds of organizations as well. And if we're not in a learning period, we can, or sorry, if we're not in an emergency situation, we can of course also use the learning mode, which means that we will let the appliance initially learn the behavior for a week and then put it into protection mode. But as I said, the learning period is a continuous situation, so it will always learn the behavior of network traffic. So when the behavior is changing, it's automatically going to understand this. And this will give us a very low maintenance cost for this solution, for example, because you don't need to go in and tune the system manually with these kinds of dedicated solutions. The solution will tune itself automatically using the behavioral engine on an ongoing basis. And of course, we do support IPv6 networks as well, so this appliance is future-proof. So if I would like to protect my organization with such a dedicated solution, I basically have two options. The first option, and this is the primary option that you should select, is to deploy an appliance on premises. And you should always deploy it in front of your firewall, your stateful devices, because this is, as we heard from previous speakers, these are usually bottlenecks when it comes to denial of service attacks, because a firewall is usually not built for handling 800,000 packets per second requests in comparison to what it was supposed to do, and that's deep inspection of traffic. Now, deploying it like this will protect against almost all of the different types of denial of service attacks, except the bandwidth consumption attacks that will saturate your internet connection. So in order to handle that, because we're seeing, as Tom said, more and more of those amplification attacks, and we're going to see an increase on this in 2014, we have an option to integrate this solution to a cloud-based service called Defense Pipe. So the local appliance, when it detects an attack, it's automatically going to mitigate the attack after a couple of seconds for you, and then it will inform the cloud-based service that I'm currently mitigating the attack, and everything is fine. But then if we go above a certain level where there is a risk that we're going to saturate the internet connection, the local appliance is going to inform the cloud-based service that this is the risk, and that SOC or the ERT team at the cloud-based service will inform the customer that now there is a risk of a saturation attack, so your bandwidth connection is going to be flooded. You want us to redirect traffic and scrub the traffic in the cloud. So then we can redirect traffic over BGP or DNS, and we're going to scrub those network consuming attacks, while the more sophisticated attacks like application flooding and so on that will be detected by the local custom policies on the local appliance will still be handled by the local device. You still have multiple layers of protections. And the nice thing with this scenario is also that it's ISP independent. So you don't need to select an ISP that has a local scrubbing center when having this kind of cloud-based service. So with a dedicated appliance solution, the idea is that you should let DDoS Protector do the job for you. You have a solution in place, it will automatically detect and mitigate an attack, and then you should use smart event to monitor the situation. And this is the experience we have with customers using this today. They don't need to go and do changes on a daily basis with this appliance. They don't need to manually tune thresholds because the appliance is doing this for you. And then if you really do need help, if the solution is not blocking an attack automatically for whatever reason, then we do support you. So within the support contract, you have support with the emergency response team. that will help you if needed. And of course, after an incident have happened, you should, of course, also validate what actually happened during the attack, because attackers are using denial of service attacks as a diversion method, and this is usually also why we're seeing those low and short bursts of attacks. For example, I've been working with one of the largest Nordic financial groups here in Nordics. I'm from Sweden. And what we saw there is that they are being targeted with short bursts of denial of service attacks, maybe going for like 5 minutes and it's over, and then 10 minutes and then it's over. And we started investigating why this was happening. And then we could see that at the same time as they were targeting attacks, the attacker tried to do intrusions at the systems, because they used the ripple effects of the denial of service attacks to make the security engineers unaware of an intrusion method, because the security engineer will not know if it's because the ripple effects of the denial of service attack that the system is not responding correctly, or it's because someone is trying to do intrusion. So usually, yes, you should also do follow-ups of these different events, even though you have a dedicated appliance, or if you're using those different kinds of options that you have today within your existing security infrastructure. So with a dedicated appliance, you will be able to block attacks automatically within seconds, in comparison to, for example, using those more basic kinds of protections that we offer from the checkpoint gateways. Now, I'm not saying that those basic kinds of protections are all bad, but they shouldn't be used on a regular basis, because they will probably generate a lot of false positives, and they will drop legitimate users as well as attack traffic to rate limit the traffic. But if you don't have anything else in place, sure, use it to make the system up and run. But with this dedicated appliance, we can customize the protection and also the deployment to match in any different types of scenarios that we need for the organization. It's very easy to get up and running, and it will automatically learn the behavior. You don't need to know the amount of requests your web server has. You don't need to know the amount of SYN packages and TCP packages that the organization is being received. The system will learn this. And it's also integrated into Checkpoint security management solution, so the learning curve is very low for this solution if you do have an existing Checkpoint infrastructure today, because you're using the same monitoring tools as you have been using for your Checkpoint infrastructure previously. So that was a brief cover or presentation of the dedicated solution that we have today. And that was what I was supposed to present. I don't know if there are time for questions.
Thanks very much for that, Jim. I've just unmuted all of the speakers today, so Tom, David, and also yourself. Would like to open it up to the audience for any questions they've got, either on the Heartbleed vulnerability or any of the DDoS prevention and mitigation measures presented. I have one question just now, but I'd like to leave a couple of minutes just to, a few seconds for people to type in any questions they've got via the questions box, and we'll cover them off as they come in. Okay, so the first question I have at the moment is for someone around the the Heartbleed vulnerability. The question is to the panel is: should we be waiting for vulnerable sites to also change their SSL certificates and keys in addition to patching? Can I ask someone to cover that one off? Okay, I'm just going to... Okay, so just to repeat the question, sorry, apologies. The question was, should we be waiting for vulnerable sites to also change their SSL certification and keys in addition to patching as a response to Heartbleed before you're changing any passwords, etc.?
Yes, in essence. I mean, there is no point changing passwords until you know that the site that you are changing the passwords for has been protected. There's absolutely no point at all. You wait until, say, Google. Say you have a Google account. You wait for them to tell you that they are patched and that they are secure, and you then change your password. The problem, as I kind of mentioned, is that websites don't seem to be notifying people proactively that they fix this problem. We're taking it as read that nearly 2/3 of websites out there that use SSL are vulnerable, but which ones are and which ones aren't. You don't want to necessarily have to change all of your passwords, because all of us have got different passwords for every website, right? Because we're all in IT security, so we all do that. So you don't know which ones you need to change and which ones you need to not change. It's a really difficult question. Ultimately, I would be looking for any website, and this is what I've been doing. Google, I've changed my password. IFTTT, as I showed in the presentation, have notified I've changed my password on that. Others, I'm looking to see if they have fixed the problem before I change my password. So hopefully that asks the question. Unfortunately, a lot of the companies are not proactively notifying that they fixed the problem, so you need to do a bit of homework yourself before you change it. But changing your password before they fix is pointless. You may as well just not bother changing it at all.
David, this is Jim as well from Checkpoint. I can just add into this that there are 4 kinds of categories that can be leaked here. So we have the primary category is the key material. That's the SSL key that we use to encrypt the traffic towards the recipient. And then we have the public key materials, and then we have the protected contents in form of usernames and passwords. So in regards to the question if the SSL certificate should also be changed, yes, the answer is yes. There could be a potential risk that the SSL key is within the memory bank that the attack is able to get information out from.
Okay.
Okay, the next question that we have is around, someone's commented that they like the idea of the penalty box. Can someone explain how we would go about implementing this?
Tom, probably one for you or Jim, mate.
Yep, okay. So the penalty box itself is actually just part of the R76 and above release. And you initially set some thresholds. So there's a couple of commands that I can give to Dave to pass on to those that need. But you initially set some thresholds in the penalty box software, if you will, at the CLI. So is it in mode? Am I protecting internal and external IPs? What's the threshold over which I will start to react or respond? And then from there, you can use those features. It sort of automatically switches itself on based on those settings that you've defined at the CLI.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, that's great. And then I have another question around the Heartbleed vulnerability. Is there a specific website to check if a URL is vulnerable?
Yes, there is, and actually that's in the PowerPoint deck. Oh, in my PowerPoint deck, it was in there. The URL was there. There is one that is specifically mentioned. Let me just see if I can pull it off the top of my head. I can't remember.
Work there. So if you can all give me just a few seconds. And
we're all racing to try and get to the slide, aren't we? Hang on, or get to it.
I'll try and grab it because I know we were using it yesterday to test a few sites.
Filippo.io/Heartbleed is the one that checkpoint that you guys mentioned, Tom. So filippo.io/Heartbleed. But that will come around in the slide deck when we send it around later.
There's also www.sslabs.com/SSL test. That's one that's run by Qualys. You can also use.
Okay, Thank you very much for those answers. I'll just leave a couple of seconds to see if there are any more questions. Otherwise, we'll thank everyone for their presentations and also everyone who's attended today for your time. Okay, thank you everyone. We haven't had any more questions, and thanks everyone for their time. We will be sending around the presentation deck from the webinar in a follow-up email, which will give the brief summary of what we covered today. And thank you very much to Jim and Tom from Checkpoint, Kieran from F5, and David for taking us through the information today. Thank you.